Hey guys, welcome back to Tethan Props. Today I'm going to show you a really exciting project. It's my combination of two really iconic helmets from two different series. We've got Eomer's helmet from Lord of the Rings crossed with a Clone Trooper Phase 2 from Star Wars. So the first thing I had to do was print out a Clone Trooper helmet. So I printed this one in two major pieces and then a lot of extra little pieces. So the extra little pieces didn't fit terribly well straight off the printer, so I had to do a little bit of heat forming on them before I glued them on. So gluing on all the mohawks there was probably the hardest part because they didn't quite fit off coming off the printer. I had to do a bit of sealing around the sides, but apart from that, it was all good. The next stage was to smooth it out a little bit just to make it perfect before I start the Bondo, and I did this with a soldering iron, and that's good on 3D prints because it just melts it and smooths it out. So the next stage was to start with the Bondo. So Bondo is a really widely used material for helmet makers and prop makers. So it's an air drying kind of putty that you just put on all the surfaces, let it dry, and then you go off and sand it later. So I put this over the entire helmet because it was fully 3D printed, which means there's print lines over the full thing, which means I just had to Bondo and make sure I sanded every little nook and cranny. So quite a lot of Bondo. The helmet's quite heavy after you do this a couple times, but it's well worth the results. So after you've finished putting Bondo over the whole thing, it's time to get sanding. You'll have to probably Bondo and sand it 2 to 3 times depending on how thick you put the Bondo on. Obviously if you put it on thicker to start with, you can sand more often and make it smoother, but I think I did this about 2 times and that was enough to give me the finish that I was after. So the next stage after you've happy with the amount of Bondo and sanding that you've done is to just use a filler primer. So a filler primer is a really thick spray paint that helps to fill in those really small scratches. So a couple coats of this really gives it a good finish in the end. So one mistake that often happens when you're making props is you don't fully check product compatibilities between different materials that you're using. So you can see here that I went back and added a little bit more of the filler putty, the Bondo, onto the helmet in areas where I thought I wanted to do a little bit more, and it actually cracked when it was sitting on top of that filler primer. So what I did was I just went and fully removed all of the putty that I put on and just went with another couple coats of the filler primer. So just make sure to check that your materials are compatible with each other before putting it onto your final product. So again, another couple layers of filler primer or the spray putty, and the helmet's pretty much in a good to go state. So you can see there, it's really smooth, it's got a good finish on it. To start putting it all together. So you can see that I've got a lot of accessories because the model that I used was a Phase 2 Commander Cody, which has every accessory possible for a clone helmet. So I've also printed off a lot of other pieces that I'm going to use as part of the Eomer design features. So that includes those Celtic ribbons there, a lot of extra little decals, some horse heads and things like that. So I've got all my pieces ready to go and I could start mashing them together. So the first thing that I was doing here was on the visor to add that Celtic rune knot work. So I 3D modeled that from scratch, printed it out into long strands and then printed off a bunch of those, and I'm cutting them to shape, heat forming them and then gluing them with super glue in place. So I'm just doing this over the whole visor. There's lots of different places on the helmet as well that also have this rune work, so I'm just going ahead and doing all those. So all these rune pieces are filament 3D printed. So some parts are in resin printed, but most of it's filament printed, which means you can heat form it. So with a heat gun, you just got to be careful not to overheat it, because if you overheat it, it melts it, deforms it, and you're never going to get it back. So applying a little bit of heat, let it get a bit soft, and then you can actually mold it in place. So it's really good doing heat molding for pieces like this. So this is going over a really curved and complex surface. So all you have to do is heat mold it, let it get really malleable, put it on that surface that you're wanting, hold it there for a while until it cools down and freezes itself in shape, and then just glue it on. So there you can see most of the ribboning done on the visor and side of the helmet there. Looked really good, very happy with that. Adding some decals onto the back there. So I've got a resin 3D printed disc that's got some Celtic runes on it. Seems to fit the design of Eomer. It's not taken directly from his helmet, but it suits really well. So just glued that in place there. There's a couple horse head ones that suit the theme really well, put on the side there. So the top mohawk of Eomer's helmet that holds the horse hair, I couldn't find anything online for that, so I had to 3D model that myself. But the beauty of doing that, it means I could just make it so it fit perfectly onto that mohawk section. So now just with a bit more of that ribboning, making sure that it heat molded first and then putting it on where I need and then gluing it in place. So now it's time to start gluing the visor on. So as you can see, pretty much the only glue that I'm using for this whole thing is super glue. People often ask what's the best glue for 3D prints. So in my experience for both filament and resin prints, super glue works the best. It's really quick setting and it holds it together really strongly. So can definitely recommend using super glue. It's time to now start putting the horse head on. So to attach this and kind of mold it in properly to the helmet, I'm using a 2-part epoxy clay. So what you do with this is you cut it on half, mix it together, and then you've got about 5 minutes working time to mold it however you like. I put the horse head in there and then smoothed out around all the edges and let it set, and that was pretty much done. So just going with some heat moldable plastic, I just added a few more details. So it was the same process of cut out the shape that I want, heat mold it, put it on the surface that I'm after, let it set there, and then just glue it in place. So I did that over a couple different spots on the helmets, added some rivets, and those bits were pretty much done. So here's all the details on the helmet, and I'm extremely happy with how it's turned out at this point. And now it's time to start painting this thing. So with any 3D print, start off with a primer. It helps every layer after that stick to the print better. So I always use a grey primer. It lets you get a really good view to see if you've got any inconsistencies in the prints, if you need to go back and do any more Bondo work or anything like that. So always start with a grey primer. The next layer is a gloss black. Gloss black is really good for anything metallic because it makes a really good undercoat. I like to do a really light misting with my silvers, which means I want a really nice solid coat of that gloss black underneath to help undercoat the whole thing. The next stage is taking that gloss aluminium or silver spray paint that you have and just do a light misting. You don't want to go heavy with this, otherwise it just makes it too flat. If you do a light misting, it instantly makes it look like metal and makes it look really nice. The next step was to just mask off all the areas that I wanted to keep silver and then go over with a gold spray paint on those highlights and give them a nice coating of gold. So for some areas I just chose to use a paintbrush and a gold acrylic paint. It was going to be a bit hard to take those off nicely, so I just decided to use a paintbrush for those. So that included the 2 emblems on the sides, the emblem on the back, and also the grille section at the front. So it was time to now glue in the microphone pieces. So these were just painted black with a bit of silver on the front, and again, super glue them in place and they're never going to move. The next stage was to start weathering this thing. So with all my painting, I always start off with a really heavy black wash. So what a black wash is you take black acrylic paint, water it down and put it over every single surface, let it set in a little bit and then go back with a paper towel and rub off all the excess. So what this does is leave all the black acrylic paint in all the nooks and crannies and just gives it a layer of depth. And the beauty of this process is you can go back and do it over and over again. So if you do a full black wash and it's not as dark as what you wanted, or it doesn't look as weathered, you can just go back and repeat this process over and over until you get the desired effect. So the next stage was to incorporate one of the main features of Eomer's helmet, and that is like that leather layered look that's on the back of the helmet. So what I did was I made some paper templates of the leather that I needed, and there's going to be 3 layers, so I'm just going to cut out the 3 different layers that I need and then get them ready for sewing together. So once I got my 3 layers, I'm happy with how they look. I've test fit them on. It's time to start gluing them in place. So just a little tack of super glue in each of the corners helps keep them together, and it means that when I'm sewing it all together, they stay in place. So the next stage was putting in a bunch of holes. So I do this with a leather hole punch, and I can't even count how many holes there are, but it took quite a while. But in the end, doing proper leather working will make this piece stand out. This was one of the most time-consuming parts of the whole process, so it was doing the outline thread of the whole leather section and also between each of the layers. So all up this took probably about 2 hours to do, so sit back and enjoy. So after all the threading was done and I'd done a black wash over the leather, it was time to glue it on. So using super glue again, I just put glue over the sections where it would contact the actual helmet and then just simply glued it on. So the next bit is to now add the highlight. So I probably could have done this way back when I did the dark wash, but I decided to leave it here just in case I needed to do anything else with the painting when I was doing the leather section. So highlight painting is just done with a dry brush with some chrome silver. So dry brushing is where you get a little bit of paint on the brush, get rid of most of it on a paper towel, and then just go and hit the highlights, and it shows where natural scratches would be and just adds that, again, extra layer of depth to the piece. So here's the completed helmet with all the painting. I've added a visor. It's just a bit of clear black plastic, so nothing too special. And it's time to add the horsehair mane that Eomer's helmet is pretty iconically seen with. So to do this, I got a white wig, combined it into one bundle, and then just super glued it into the hole that I'd pre-modeled into that 3D print that I designed way back. So there it is, guys. Hope you enjoyed this mashup build of Eomer's helmet from Lord of the Rings with a Phase 2 Clone Trooper helmet with parts of Clone Commander Cody's helmet, so the visor and the front grille sections and the mohawk. So this was a real fun project to work on. Haven't done anything like it before. I've done my crossover lightsabers between Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, but never a helmet. I'm excited to do more of these, so if you've got any ideas, leave them in the comments below. And again, thank you for watching all the way to the end of this longer video. Hope you can like and subscribe to the channel. Check out my other videos, it helps a lot. And I hope you enjoyed this one. I'll see you on the next one.